Welcome to class number 10 of Faith and Calm. Gee, I didn't know that we would go this long. I didn't know that we would need so many classes.
I think we're going to need a lot more.
Seeing what's happening and all the things coming out. Wow, yeah, it's amazing. It's really quite something. As they say, I forget it was Rabbi Akiva, Moshe Rabbeinu, who said that he didn't want to live in the time right before Mashiach because it's just so chaotic. Because that's part of one of the things it says in Gemara Sota about the nature of the days before Mashiach. And people said, people thought that was like 200 years ago. They said, oh, children won't respect parents, and there'll be chutzpahdik, and there'll be inflation, and there'll be leaders of the generation will be like the face of the dog, which is a very interesting comment. One of the rabbis explained, what does that mean? The face of the generation are like a face of a dog. So they said, if you...
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm going to turn Amy said that if you ever watch a master walk his dog, you watch that the dog always is running in front of the master. But of course, the dog doesn't know where to go. So the dog is always looking backwards to see where the master wants to go so that he can lead in front. So it's the nature of our leadership since maybe Truman or something like that has been, they always are polling to see where the masses are headed, and then they try and put themselves in the front before everyone else. It's a very astute description. Only the Gemara could make such a description of the nature of leadership in the current generation. Well, maybe you don't find that humorous. I find it humorous.
Yeah.
So the title of this, the subtitle of this one talk is about finding light and finding in the darkest places, or finding God, or finding yourself in the darkest places. And go ahead, take the phone. Should I mute everybody so that this doesn't happen here? Okay, so I'll mute everybody. And if you want to have anything to say, you can just unmute yourselves. Because I would love to have questions. The joke about the rabbi once who came to the synagogue, and he, and after 3 months, he handed his resignation. And the board asked, they said, why are you resigning? And he said is it that you don't like the board members? And he said, no, the board members are very fine people. I get along fine with them. He says, maybe it's something in the congregation. He says, no, it's a very nice congregation. He says, maybe the pay isn't good enough. No, the pay is fine. I have no problem. They said, so why are you resigning? Everybody likes you. And he says that because this is the first question I ever got in 3 months of being here. So we like questions. Questions show an interest, and it's the way you learn, and it's a good thing to do, ask questions. So stick in your questions anytime you want. Unmute yourself and throw in your questions. So I'm going to continue a little bit, because I think with my wife talked a little bit about David HaMelech, and I think it's a good King David, and I think it's a good lead into this idea of finding darkness in the darkest places. Because certainly his life is very, very disturbing and confused, and the whole idea that this is where the idea of Jewish monarchy comes from, and where Melech and Mashiach and the ultimate purpose of existence is going to be revealed, seems to be in a very murky situation. There's a story that's told about this. There once was a community, and a man died, an older man in the community died, and he was disliked by everybody in the community. And they came to the cemetery, and the rabbi said, we have a long-standing tradition in this community that whenever we bury somebody has to say something good about this person. Otherwise, we can't bury them. So they waited. They waited 5 minutes. They waited 10 minutes. They waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Everybody was plotzing. Nobody had anything nice to say about this guy. Finally, the rabbi said, we can't bury him until somebody says something nice about him. So finally, one old man gets up and he says, I can say something about him. The rabbi says, is it good? And he says, yeah. And he says, so what do you have to say? He says, I knew his brother, and he was worse. So you can imagine, that's the best thing you can say about the guy. So we have many problems with David, King David. I mean, what was he doing with Bathsheba? What was going on? Why did he get involved in so much controversial kinds of stuff there and so forth? It's very confusing. He was fighting with his father-in-law, Melech Shaul, King Saul, and running away from him, actually, but he had to fight to keep himself alive. What was that all about? But even more so, there was a lot of questions about King David and whether he was fit to be a king. In fact, there was questions whether he was fit to be a Jew, because Doeg, the advisor to King Saul, said, hey, ask of whether he's even fit to be a Jew, because his great-grandmother was Ruth. And Ruth, we know, is a Moabite. And it says explicitly in the Torah, a Moabite cannot come into the Kahal, cannot marry into the Jewish people. So how did she become Jewish? She can convert, but she can't marry. She can't marry a Jew. That's the law, it seems like. I mean, that's not what we learned last week, is that it means only a male Moabite, not a female. But that law was not well known. So there was a lot of controversy about him. And as my wife pointed out the story last week about Nitzevus, his father wasn't even sure whether he was a Jew, because his grandmother, Ruth, didn't seem to be Jewish. So he separated from his wife. And then there was the whole story in the middle of the night, how the handmaid, he was going to have relations. He was going to marry the handmaid, and he invited her into the room in the middle of the night, and how she told her mistress Nitzevus, the real wife of Yishai, David's father, says, you go in. And so she snuck in, and then she was, and they had a baby, but nobody knew except for Nitzevus and the handmaid, the Ishmaelite lady, that there was that Yishai had relations with his real wife. And so they thought he was a mamzer. He was not born from a illegitimate relationship. And so he was shunned for 28 years, and he was sitting with the sheep and the shepherd and so forth. And it was it was a very hard life. And then you get into the other stories about him, about his ancestry. It's all very confusing and murky, because who is he descended from? He's descended from Yehuda. And you know how Yehuda had his kid, right? It was, he was out there shearing a sheep, and he came across the crossroads, and he came across Tamar, his daughter-in-law. And he said he wanted to have relations. He didn't know it was his daughter-in-law. And the whole business of how, they had a baby, and he was going to have her executed for being unfaithful to her husband. And it turned out that she was not unfaithful to her husband. She was marrying Yehuda because she was legally allowed to marry Yehuda. But it's a very strange kind of relationship. And Yehuda himself, the whole story of how did the tribe of Yehuda come about? From the marriage of Yaakov and Rachel and Leah. And Yaakov didn't know who he was sleeping with, and he went to, because he was marrying, and he got married to Rachel. This is all very, and to Leah, and it's very, very murky. And Moab, the female side of the family, is also very murky, because we know that the whole nation of Moab comes from Lot, right? Sodom was destroyed, and the two daughters of Lot escaped. They went into a cave. They thought everybody was dead, and they got their father drunk. All this promiscuity, all this murkiness, all this difficulty in the royal family of the Jews, which ultimately leads to Mashiach, which leads to the ultimate revelation of the truth of the world. Why does it have to happen in such a very convoluted manner? That's what I'm going to say. And I think it's going to have lessons for us both in the macrocosm, the big picture, and then in the little picture in our own personal lives, which is why I'm telling you the story. So to understand this, we have to go to a book called Sefer Gilgulim, the Book of Reincarnation by the Arizal. The great famous Kabbalist Arizal, who lived in Tzfat, who passed away in 1532 in the city of Tzfat. Tzfat is known in English as Safed, I guess. Does that help you at all? Northern Israel. Go there. It's a very mystical town. It's a beautiful trip to do. And it's a very interesting town, and there's all sorts of interesting restaurants and art stuff. It's a very interesting town. Anyway, so he passed away there. You can go to his mikveh. You can go to his shul. It's a very interesting place to go to. He wrote in his Sefer Gilgulim, the book of reincarnation, he wrote the following. Now, you have to, a little preface here about all this idea about Kabbalah and the mystical aspect of Torah. The Rambam explains that this is really the true science. It's not just supernatural and transcendental. It's really the deeper understanding, because scientists understand the material world and try and derive from it theorems about and theories about how the world works and how models work. But you can only learn so much by looking at the material world and trying to guess what the world comes from. You're not going to learn about things like love and devotion and spirituality and psychology. You really can't really understand human soul and human being unless you have a larger picture that covers all of this. And that is what Kabbalah talks about. But you have to have some assistance to be able to translate those ideas. So I'll first give you straight what he says, and then I'll give you some explanation, and then we'll try and see how that applies to what's going on today with us and everything else. So he says the following. He says that God, there are certain souls cannot come down into this world in a normal way. They have to come through a very, very difficult, convoluted path, because there are these forces called klipa. I'll explain what that means. That get a hold of these particular souls, and they don't let them come down easily into this world, except unless they're through what he calls tachbulot und mirma, which means something like schemes and trickery. And the klipa is not willing to let these souls come down into this world. So therefore, certain great souls, like King David, like who else came out this way? Rabbi Akiva, who came from converts, and many other great souls who came down to this world. They had to come down into this world through a very, very tricky, difficult path. And what he's saying is as follows. God is unlimited, and God can do whatever he wants. But God wanted to create a natural world. He wanted to create a world where people operate according to their own understanding. They don't look like robots. They have free will to choose good or for bad, and they can go however they want. And yet, he gives them the opportunity to earn their way by saying, "I'm going to reject what's not allowed and to choose what's good." In order for that to happen, godliness has to be concealed. So there is godliness in this world. There is holiness. There are good things. There are tremendous good things. But God gives power to these powers called klipa, which literally means shell. Like there is a shell around any food or fruit or something of that sort that conceals the fruit inside. So you got to crack open the shell. You got to take off the peel in order to get inside to be able to get the actual nourishment inside. It's a cover-up. So it doesn't have its own reality per se. Its whole point is to cover up. Now this cover-up, this concealment, this shell, God gives it a certain limited amount of energy to survive, since everything has to come ultimately, all forces have to come from God. But basically, it thrives by concealment, the hiding and providing an external face to things, a superficial views to things, so that we want to look at the shell and not see what the real truth is inside. So it gives us, it conceals what really is the reality. And so people, so when people look at things superficially, they're just looking at the shell. They're not looking at the inside of what's supposed to be. Because klipa needs energy, it needs oxygen, it needs sources, it needs life too. It's always hungry for some more kedusha, which is the source of all energy, holiness. It needs that holiness, and it's always looking to suck it from somewhere, to get it from somewhere. It doesn't have its own. So it's always looking for opportunities for how it can get some sort of holiness. So it attaches to people or activities or something like that, and that's how it gets its energy. What does this basically mean? It means as follows, that, in the case of King David, King David was a very, very holy soul. But the Klippa doesn't want it to necessarily come down into this world because it sees how how much he can accomplish, how holy he is, how powerful he is. And it's worried that it's going to remove all the blinders from everyone and they're going to see the truth. And once you light a candle in a dark room, darkness disappears. So darkness only exists in hard to find places. Only when there's lies and there's concealment and there's this and misinformation and false news and so forth. That's where Klippa survives, because it can suck the energy out of other things, and that it gets that energy because but once truth comes out. So if King David, so the Klippa says, I got a hold of the soul. I'm not letting him come down into this world unless you do what the Arizal calls trickery. So what do you do to it? So what God does is he says, okay, I'll let the soul come down, and we'll let him come down in a very dark kind of place. We'll see what kind of, because the Arizal says sometimes the greatest souls are come out from marriages or to people who are not very good, who are very ignorant or or just bad people. And when the soul comes down into that difficult situation, the Klippa says, wow, I'm going to get some more energy this way. Because what kind of a person's going to come out of a marriage with Ruth and Boaz in the middle of the night and a mill and stuff like that? It's not doesn't look like a very good situation at all. What kind of holiness is going to come out of such a situation? So he says, fine, I'll let David come down, and he'll probably mess up, and he'll cause more damage and destruction on a moral and emotional basis than anybody else, because he's a very powerful soul. The thing was, King David was such a powerful soul, that didn't bother. He was able to escape that situation. He was able to transcend the situation. So sometimes, what we're saying basically here is that sometimes the greatest light and the greatest advance and the greatest success in people's lives comes out right when you think you're in the worst kind of situation, when that's all bad and it's all falling apart, because Klippa is trying to say, you know what, you should get depressed, and you should get your remorse, and you should say it's impossible, and you should get melancholy and sad, because that's really the gateway. The rabbis say it's not the Vera, it's not the sin that causes the problem, it's the depression afterwards, because that just convinces you you're a bad person, and then you just do another and another and another and another. That's the scheme, you're playing into the Klippa's hands. You're playing into the forces of darkness's hands. So what the answer is always to be happy and to be upbeat and to be excited and to say, you know what, there's something good that can come out of this, and there probably is, because oftentimes, just like we see in all of these stories with King David, 4, 5, and with 3, 6, 7, and with 2, 6, 7, 5, with Lot, and with all these other characters and so forth, the situation looked really bad, but really these are where the seeds of godliness and the seeds of Mashiach are coming out of. They came out from Lot. They came out from Moab. They came out from Yehuda and Tamar's relationship and parents, and all these very questionable situations. That's exactly where that power came from. So, like on a personal basis, I was the last year, I've been facing a lot of anti-Semitism and really nasty stuff at work and bad things and stuff like that. And then finally 2 weeks, they let me go. And I've been as happy as a lark since then, because it's turning out so well, It's just like, I'm getting more money now. It's like, I'm getting job interviews. It's like, so, it's like, it's wonderful, but you have to be able to always look at things in a positive outlook, and you have to be able, when you're excited about life and when you see things in a good way, then you know what, you can actually become the magnet for what you need to be. But yeah, what the Klippa wants is you to get depressed. He wants you to get sad. He wants you to feel like you're a failure, and you're failing again for the 15th time, and it's going to lead to bad stuff and stuff like that, because then all your energy and all your godly force and all your other stuff that I've been talking about in here becomes part of, that feeds him, and he lives on that kind of stuff, because he wants you to take things superficially, and in superficial stuff, that's where that energy comes from. So to explain this a little bit better in way of a story, because I like stories, and stories do explain stuff and so forth, there was Mendel Futterfass. I don't know if you know him, but he was a Chabad Chassid. He lived in he passed away only 20 years ago. lived in Russia, and he fought against the communists, and he was everybody's hero. And eventually they found out what he was doing about advancing Yiddishkeit, and they put him in the Gulag and so forth. And one time he was in this prison cell with a bunch of murders and pickpockets and thieves and stuff of that sort. And he noticed that they always had a card deck with them. And he was very friendly. He made friends with everybody, you know, and the most unlikely kind of people. He was just that kind of person who would find connections with people in any situation. So he knew the head of the thieves there, and he said, you know, I don't know, how do you manage to play cards? Because every day I see the guard comes in for inspection, and he's furious about to find out who's playing cards, because cards are against the regulations of the prison. And every day he does this thorough check of the whole place. He gets you all undressed, and he strip searches you and searches every location. And every day, 5 minutes after he's gone, you're playing cards again. How does he manage to get that card deck? So the guy says it's not no problem at all. Explain. I mean, the thief says it's no problem. I'll explain exactly. We have very good pickpockets here. So you know what we do? We take the card deck and we put it in the guard's pocket when he comes in. And when he leaves, we take it back out again. So he didn't look to see where, you know, in his own pockets. Oftentimes, the solution to our problems and our darknesses and our difficulties is right there in our pocket. It just looks like it's dark because that's, as I said, what Klippa does is it tries to hide the truth. It tries to fake it. It tries to distort it. It tries to abscond the issue. And then you just have to look at the newspapers today. Here was an issue, a positive issue. And many people are rightly upset of what happened to that black guy in Minnesota. George Foreman, I think his name was.
Floyd.
Okay, I'm thinking of the boxer,
Yeah.
Floyd. And that's a good sign. That's a great thing, you know, because people don't like injustice and they don't like to see that. And whatever, you know, whatever the story really was, it certainly doesn't look, it looks like a terrible thing. And yet, certain other people decided to obscure the situation with fake news and falseness. And look what they've led to, you know, to all sorts of rioting and stealing, which is obviously not good. You don't accomplish anything with destroying all the stores of the poor retailers who had nothing to do with this by doing, you know, and you're not training your kids to be mentioned like either by letting them go off and do this stuff. So again, things survive on fakeness, on law. Too bad our leaders can't point this out. But if we all spread this, I think it has to come from the grassroots. We have to explain to people, we have to teach people, this is our time on the stage before Mashiach comes, to be able to explain to them says, you know what, don't look at the superficial. Look deeper into the story. Look deeper into what's going on in the news. Look at the good part and look at the bad. And to be able to judge it in a positive way and to be able to say, you know what, I think there's something positive in any event, even the darkest events, that something good can come out of it. And I think when we do that, it all becomes good. I'll finish with a story. I think represents it. It's a story I looked up. The Rebbe was always very big on this idea of trach good, v'zayin good. Think good, and it will turn out to be good. It's not just a psychological advice how to get through things, but he actually is as a command to change the reality of the world. So I don't know if you know the story. I may have told it to you before. There was a young couple. Their name was Gracie and Walter Lance. And Gracie and Walter Lance got married, and they for a honeymoon, they were a little bit artistic and unconventional, and they decided that rather than go on the conventional kind of honeymoon, they were going to go off into the forest, and they were going to spend a nice honeymoon there and 3 days in a cabin in the forest. So they went off to the cabin in the forest. After the first night, they're ready to go to bed. And a woodpecker decides that he's going to make some holes in the roof. You know, there's some bugs there. It's something interesting to do. The whole night long, they couldn't sleep. The woodpecker was whacking away. The next day, Walter Lance wanted to go out there with a shotgun and kill this woodpecker. His wife wouldn't let him do it. But he was furious. No sleep the whole night long. The next night, they saw it was going to rain, so they figured he wouldn't be around. Yeah, he wasn't around, but he made enough holes in the roof that everything got wet. The bed was wet. Everything in the house was wet and so forth. And it was a miserable, miserable second night. The third night, I think the woodpecker was back again. So the whole honeymoon was complete disaster. And as they were driving back to New York City, Gracie and Walter are trying to think, are sort of silent, thinking about what they're, maybe they blame each other for the honeymoon, but they didn't do it. Gracie looked at Walter and said, "You know what? We had a wonderful, wonderful honeymoon, and now our job is just to try and figure out what that wonderful thing was. How is that wonderful? We got to figure it out." So when they got back to New York, she realized she's a copywriter. He's an artist, a graphic artist, and they came up with this idea of making a comic with a woodpecker.
Oh, Walter
Where
Nance.
Woody the Woodpecker came from this
Oh
story.
my God.
40 years later, they were interviewed on TV, and they said, "What was the very best moment in your life?" And they said, without a doubt, it was that honeymoon, because that was the genesis of our career. We worked together our whole lives. It gave us a wonderful opportunity to meet people. It made we had our living for the rest of our lives, and it all came about because of that woodpecker, just because of the woodpecker. So, this is the trick. We have to start learning how to do it. And it's hard, and it takes constant effort every day. But how to look at the situation and saying, you know what, it is not dark out there. It is bright out there. And the dark, what's happening is that all the spots, when you clean the clothes, and you make them very clean and so forth, then you notice more than smudge in the dirt on top of them. So what's coming out is the dirt is coming out. We're able to see all the dark, all the dust bunnies underneath the couch and so forth, because the place is so clean and so forth. So we're making things cleaner, and it's coming out, and it could be looked at as disturbing, and I understand, but and it's not all that pleasant. Some things are quite difficult. But, it's our attitude. Try good, design good. And my wife will continue with thinking good.
Wait, Yecheskel Shimon, are you saying that something good has come out of this situation in Minnesota? I mean, what are you saying? How are you relating it to that?
How about what the police officer did?
Oh, okay, fine. Well, here's my wife she's gonna surprise.
Okay.
So you have to look at it. You're not gonna get this from the news, and you're not gonna get it from the TV, and you're not gonna get it from the journalists, and you're not gonna get it from our so-called leaders, because I said at the beginning about our leaders in the face of the dog. You're gonna find it out from the following. So you're gonna have to look a little deeper into what the story is, and not look at the superficial, the shell of the situation, the clip. So there have been numerous stories of really amazing amount of unity and togetherness out of this. I read a story about how in Florida, I think it was in Miami, the police were, when they confronted the people, they got down on their knees and said, let's pray, and let's say something, and have a moment of silence for the person, for George Flood, who was killed and so forth. And they said, of course, we will join together you. My wife has another story. I think the story was that they were about to, why don't you tell it? Go ahead. So you'll tell that story.
Thank you, Yecheskel Shimon. Thank you.
Too desperately trying to. Yeah, Sarah's been trying to. You said, can you send it again? She's been trying to get on. Okay, good. Hi, everybody. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
Hello.
So, good to see everybody. And
Good to see you.
okay, so the second story was that in I don't remember, Flint something, Michigan, yeah. Okay, that's sorry. In Michigan, there was a protest march headed for the police station, and the policemen put on their riot gear, their helmets and their batons, and they went out, and they didn't know what to expect, and then the sheriff took off his helmet and and put his baton down, and he said, "You guys, we are with you. We're not happy about what happened either. What can we do for you? What do you suggest? We're with you. We're not against you. We're with you, and we're also upset." And so somebody yelled out, "Walk with us!" And they all started chanting, "Walk with us!" And all the police joined the protest march against unnecessary, ridiculous violence, ridiculous levels of, I don't know.
Bullying.
I don't know what it was. It was just like, I don't know how such a thing could happen. But anyway,
Distraction.
yeah. So it brought a beautiful march of the police and the protesters together again, instead of violence. So So anyway, I want to, that's not my topic. So it's sort of my topic, but I want to start with, I'm going to share my screen with you. Can I just do it like this? Let's see, how am I going to share screen? Could be I can do it this way. And let's see if it's going to work. Okay, open this up. Okay, can you guys see my little image? Or
No.
not? You can't see anything. Can you see it now? Now you can see it, right? I'm going to make it bigger.
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is, yeah, this is what, let me try and make it a little bigger still. Yeah. Okay, good. This is a quote from the Zohar. You see in the bottom it says Zohar. That's Zion Vav Hey Resh. You can polish up your Hebrew reading, and it says this is what was written in the Zohar. The Zohar was compiled by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was in the time of Rabbi Akiva. That was around the destruction of the Second Temple. So yeah. So anyway, here it says, the Zohar predicts, so will the Geula for the Yidden occur. Geula means the redemption. So will the redemption, and Yidden are Jews. So will the redemption for the Jews occur. When the sun of the redemption is about to shine upon them, they will be burdened with crisis after crisis and darkness after darkness. And while they're in that state, the light of Hashem will shine upon them. So it's a prediction for our times, and I think it's a pretty accurate prediction for right now. So, because light, the greatest light, usually comes through darkness, and through people making the choice to look for the light. So, a couple of weeks ago, we had the Parsha of the Midbar, and one of my favorite things to do is to read the talk that the Rebbe gave for the last talk that the Rebbe gave for whatever Parsha it was. And Parshas Bamidbar, the Rebbe talks entirely about tranquility, how to have tranquility. And the Rebbe said that Hashem designed the world so that a person would not have tranquility. And by not doing anything, Hashem built a lack of tranquility into the world. How did he do that? He did it because time constantly changes. There's the days of the week. There's every day of the week has its different flavor, and so as time passes, each hour has its own thing that happens, and things are constantly changing, and change does not bring tranquility. Also, people go from place to place. You're home, you're then at work, then you're going shopping or whatever else, wherever it is. We're constantly experiencing change in time and place, and all sorts of things are happening to us. And naturally, it should lead to a tremendous lack of tranquility. And the Rebbe says there's really only one recipe for tranquility. The recipe for tranquility is, and this is Hashem's recipe for tranquility, is that you have to ask yourself continually, what was I created for? What is my purpose at this particular minute? What is my mitzvah? What am I supposed to be doing now? And when you orient yourself on all these things are happening, what am I supposed to be doing? When you think about that, life changes completely. You're focused, you know exactly what you have to do, and you're happy. I told you in an earlier talk that when I was going through a horrible decade of crisis with my parents, I repeated this to myself like a mantra. Shlomis Yehudis, what's your mission now? Yeah, this is exploding, and this is awful, and this is terrible, and this is so frightening, and I never had a night like that in my life. What is your job right now? Oh, I think I should do this. And hey, it's my mitzvah to trust God. And each time, I think that I grew to believe that those are the most powerful, I think they're 5 or 6 words. What is my mission now? 5 words. Most powerful tool to orient yourself in this world. There's nothing more than that. I once heard from Rabbi Manis Friedman that people try and build up self-esteem in kids by saying, oh, you're so good, you're so wonderful, oh, you did that so perfectly. And he said, that doesn't give a kid self-esteem. Tell a kid what their job is, that brings self-esteem. When they go and do their job, that brings self-esteem. So anyway, and that brings tranquility as well. And tranquility and self-esteem go hand in hand. So I want to tell you a little story that was very impressive to me. One second. Haskell Shimon, it's too noisy. It's too noisy. Haskell Shimon, it's too noisy. Thank you. Okay, good. So, sorry. I want to tell you a little story about sorry, that's my good husband doing the dishes after dinner. Is that nice? So nice. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a story about this guy over here. And he had one of the worst cases of corona I ever heard of. And he's a Crown Heights resident. And he's a wonderful kind of guy. He's a psychotherapist. And in his spare time, he plays music for he's a guitarist, so he plays music for people who are having, when they had weddings and they couldn't afford it, so he would come. Or he has just a ton of nice things that he does for people. Anyway, around the beginning of April, something like that. Yeah, the beginning of April, he had a bad cold, and then he had a fever, and then he couldn't breathe, I guess, and they called Hatzalah, which is the Jewish ambulance service. It's a kindness. It's one of the charity organizations, one of the hundreds of charity organizations that exist in New York and in large Jewish communities. And they came and they said, you have to go. You don't have a choice. You really have to go to the hospital. And he went. It was a good thing he went to the hospital. First they put him on, they gave him the nose oxygen. And then 2 days later, they said the nose oxygen is not going to work anymore. You have to they gave him a mask. And then 2 days later, he needed a respirator. Right before they were going to put him on the respirator, it's, as we all know, it's such a horrible situation because your family can't come to the hospital. So right before he was put on the respirator, he texted his wife, go to the neighbor. His name is Noah, the neighbor Noah Vogel. Tell him to write to the Rebbe and put it into Igrot Kodesh. That's what I tell you guys to do all the time. If you have a problem, you write to the Rebbe and you put it in a volume of his holy writings, and the Rebbe gets an answer to you. And at another time we can talk about how that situation, how that whole method came to be. But anyway, not for now. So she ran to the neighbor. He wrote down, what the problem was. He put it into a volume of Igrot Kodesh, and they opened the answer. And the answer they got was an answer that the Rebbe was giving somebody who was going to a rehabilitation center. And he said that, and he was talking about Rosh Hashanah. He was talking about how Rosh Hashanah is the crowning of the King of Kings. And what is Hashem king of? Hashem is king over our material physical world and over all its matters. Hashem is in control of everything. And Hashem, who is the essence of goodness and the source of good, will grant a reprieve. And may this reprieve be drawn down into improvement in health of the body and improvement of health of the soul of everyone in the whole rehab center. And may it come with revealed goodness. And then he said, may the merit of this person who he's writing about, may it help everybody else in the institution in all their matters. So she thought this was a good letter. She said, okay, the Rebbe said there's going to be an improvement in health and an improvement in everything. So the wife, so the wife, whatever. Let me just tell you, the situation was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. After he was put on the respirator, 4 days after he was put on the respirator, it got even worse. The respirator was already not enough. His entire system was failing. His lungs were failing. It had failed. Everything was failing. The doctors called her in an emergency call. They said, you have to give us permission. We have to put him on I never heard of it before, ECMO, ECMO. I have to put him on an ECMO machine. And we don't even have time to tell you what this machine is. You have to say yes. Otherwise he's not going to live. You have to say yes. Just give us permission right now. So she said, okay. And then afterwards, a couple of hours later, they had time and they called her back and they told her what this was all about. And she was horrified because you need an enormous team of doctors to run this whole thing. There's so many, it's such a dangerous situation. And it's only given to the people in the absolute worst situation because it's so complex. And she asked the doctors, has any corona patient who's been putting on this survived? And they said, not yet. So that was not so encouraging. So anyway, they did all sorts of things. They got a minion together and they gave him, they made a minion on in New York, and they made people would come out on their patios and make a minion that way in an apartment building. They gave him a name, a new name. They added the name Chaim to him because that's something that people do for people who are very sick. And somebody came to them and gave them Rebbe dollars, which are also a topic for another time. But every day another problem came about. And during the son, all of a sudden it was Pesach, and her son ran the Seder, and they ate that matzah. The first night's matzah is the matzah of Amunah. They ate it with every ounce of their concentration and being. And the second night it's called the matzah of health, and they ate that with every ounce of their being. And meantime, when you're on the ECMO machine, you are they put you into a coma because they don't, it's almost like your lungs are running outside of your body. Your lungs are relaxed and your oxygen is being filtered through something else. And so finally they got good news on Pesach. He's responding. And they decided that they were going to pull him, that they were going to take him off the ECMO machine. But it takes almost a week for the body to wake up after such heavy sedation. And they told the wife, he's probably going to wake up on Shvi'i Shel Pesach, on the 7th day of Pesach, or on the 8th day of Pesach. Those are holidays. And she was in touch with rabbis all the time. And one of the head rabbis in Crown Heights said, yeah, it's a holiday, but here's what you have to do. You have to get a tablet. There's an organization that gives out tablets to, a Jewish kindness organization that gives out free tablets to the patients and their family. You have to get the tablet. You have to coordinate with the nurses. It doesn't matter if it's the 7th day of Pesach. It doesn't matter if it's the 8th day of Pesach, holiday, Shabbos, nothing matters. When he wakes up, you have to be there. And and if you have technical problems, you have to make phone calls, do whatever you can to iron out those technical problems, because you have to be there when he wakes up. He has to see a familiar face, because if you wake up like Rumpelstiltskin with 3 weeks of your life missing, it's critical. It's critical to see something familiar. You could lose your mind. You could lose your life if you don't understand what's going on. So she followed orders. And on Shvi Shel Pesach, she was on the phone with the nurses all the time, trying to get those silly things to work. And he finally woke up on the 8th day of Pesach, and it was Pekuach Nefesh. Pekuach Nefesh means a life is in danger. It was a life in danger, because he woke up and he couldn't even speak. He didn't have a voice, and she was on her tablet, and she just spoke to him very reassuringly. This is good. Everything's going to be fine. This is what happened to you. And if you didn't have a familiar face telling him that stuff, you can imagine what would have happened. So anyway, they asked this is one of my magazines that I like, La Beis Mashiach. So they interviewed her, and they asked her, what got you through? Anyway, he recuperated. He went to rehab, 2 days in a rehab, 3 days in a rehab. He was home. And they asked the wife, how did you get through this? I mean, her husband is not only in critical condition, he's comatose. He's on a machine that nobody's ever survived from with this disease. And she has 7 kids. The oldest one is 19. And, making Pesach itself is quite stressful. So she said she got her strength from 2 things. Number one, she kept the words of the Rebbe's letter in her mind again and again and again. The Rebbe said there's going to be a reprieve in matters of health of the body and of the soul. And she just focused on it in her mind. And she also heard another story about, she heard another story that happened in 1990 to a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Winter, and he was from Australia. He was in a horrible car accident, and he was in critical condition, and his rabbi was in New York with the Rebbe, and his rabbi wrote to the Rebbe, and he said, what can we do? It's such an awful situation. And the Rebbe said, maybe very briefly, the Rebbe said, when he decides that the time has finally come to fulfill the command of all our Rebbeim, of all the Rebbeim, to tracht gut wird sein gut, he's going to see that it's going to happen. What does that mean? The Rebbe used a very unusual, tracht gut wird sein gut means think good and it will be good. And the Rebbe said it's not only I'm going to unmute you, Amy, because I'm going to need you a second. The Rebbe said, tracht gut wird sein gut. It's not an aphorism. It's not a nice thing to do that maybe will help. It's not, what is that, Amy, what is the expression that, what is that thing when you visualize something and then what is that whole line of,
and manifestation?
Say it again?
Like visualization, intention.
Yes. What did they call it? What do you call it?
What do you call it?
Yeah, Yeheskel Shimon named a class after it 2 times ago.
Oh, law of attraction. That's
The
what
law of attraction. It's not just the law. Thank you. It's not just the law of attraction. It is. He said it is a command. It is a command of the Rebbeim and of the Rebbes, and it's not just a nice thing to do. And when you follow a command, especially of very holy people, when you follow a command, and you believe in it and you do it as a command, it empowers you and it empowers the situation. So that's what she did. She kept saying, the situation got worse and worse and worse. And she kept saying, I'm sorry, there is a command to believe that it's going to be good, even when there is absolutely no natural chance that it will be good. There is a command to believe that it's going to be good, and I am not accepting any other possibility. This is my only possibility because the Rebbe said so. This is the standard advice that the Rebbe gave, and that's what I'm going to do. And so anyway, I think that those are very powerful pieces of advice, and anyway, to write to the Rebbe when you're in trouble and to tracht gut wird sein gut in any situation. So I've told you in times before that these things are what help me in my life all the time. And I may have told you, I learned a long time ago that when the Rebbe says to do something through the letters to the Rebbe, it's a good thing to do it. And I learned that it's not a good thing not to do it. Like I might have mentioned it in this series, I'm not sure, that many years ago, every year on Lag BaOmer, I went to, I would go to a women's convention in Crown Heights, one of my favorite things to do. And one year I wrote for a blessing and I got a blessing, of course, go, and then I got very, very sick. And I couldn't imagine, how am I going to go? I'm so, also it was such a blast to go to the Lag BaOmer thing. It was not only a convention with lots of interesting women, but it was also a wonderful, extraordinarily holy parade when Lag BaOmer would happen on a Sunday. So that was a year when there was going to be the parade and the convention together. And I had already gotten a blessing from the Rebbe, and then I got horribly sick. And on Shabbos, the day before we were supposed to go, I got more and more like almost I'm going to go in this state, I doubted the letter, and I doubted, it didn't make any sense at all. How could I possibly travel in this condition? It's an arduous trip. How can I possibly do it? And I ended up not going, and I had a miserable Lag BaOmer. And the days after were miserable too. And I thought, Shlomo Seudas, you had a blessing. It doesn't work out when you don't listen to the Rebbe. Another time, the exact same situation, it was Lag BaOmer, and I was sick again, and I had gotten a blessing from the Rebbe. And I said, Yeheskel Shimon, I don't care if I'm in, I don't care if I'm, God forbid, with crutches and a body cast, we're going. It doesn't matter. Whatever happens, I could be in a hospital bed. I don't care. I got a bracha from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We are going. And we went and we laughed the whole way down. It was such a marvelous trip. It was so amazing because I flew above reason. I had a blessing from the Rebbe. I flew above reason, and I saw tremendous blessing above reason. And as I said, and I told this story, I know that on the 20th of March, when the Corona thing was just starting to hit New York. Um, you know, I had already gotten a blessing to go for a wedding. I think this is the last wedding they had of a normal size in New York. And I already knew, I already have a path. If I have a blessing from the Rebbe, I do it. And everybody was calling, not everybody, but my sister was sending, I already told you this, my sister was sending me threatening emails. Don't you dare do this. You do this, you're in trouble. Don't you dare do this. And my boss, who never interferes in my personal life, he called me Sunday morning when we were supposed to leave. He said, Mor Shalamis Yehudis, I never give you personal advice. Please don't go. Don't go. And I knew I had a blessing from the Rebbe. There's no way I'm not going. There's no way I can't not go. And because things were flying, I opened Igros Kodesh again, and I got another blessing. It said, and I think I told you this last time. This was not only the wedding of pretty much my best friend's kid. She's one of my best friends, and it was her. She has only 2 kids, and this is the wedding of her oldest child. Not only that, she and I were friends when we both went to a seminary. You know, we both were not frum, and then we went to this. Then we went to the seminary for women in New York, and all my friends from that seminary from 25 years ago were going to be there. It was going to be not just a wedding. I was going to be able to see people that I love that I hadn't seen in 25 years. And so I opened Igros Kodesh again, and it said, I think you might remember, it said, enjoy your reunion. And with such words, we flew down to New York. We had a magnificent time, magnificent. And you know, we took precautions. We took all the precautions, and we came home. And I didn't, and enjoyed every second of it, absolutely every second of it. Did people leave that wedding with Corona? Yeah. Yeah, I have friends who, I don't know if they got it at the wedding, but they developed Corona that week. And last week we found out, did I tell you this? Last week we found out that my husband had Corona. Yeah, my husband had Corona. 5 days after we got back from New York, I think it was a Thursday night, Haskell Shimon had a little temperature. And so he stayed in bed for a day. The whole thing lasted for like a day and a third. So Shabbos morning, he said, I'm getting out of here. I don't feel bad. I feel fine. And so back then, Massachusetts did not have tests for to see if you had the virus or not. And so his doctor said, I'm sorry, I can't send you for a test. They're not giving those tests unless you're in the hospital already. So he said, later, if you want to find out if the tests become more available, we can test you. So just last week, Haskell Shimon decided he wants to, you know, we doubted it could possibly be Corona. It was wildly too mild. And anyway, he went for the test last week, and lo and behold, the Haskell Shimon had Corona. And can you imagine what a miracle it is that I did not get it? Is that a miracle? Can I know how poo poo poo? Hashem saved my life.
Sure you didn't get it, though? Did you have
So I don't know if I got it. It's even better because I had no symptoms. And so
You're part of history, and now you're part of herd immunity. There's probably no doubt that you were an asymptomatic carrier, but
I don't know. You know, I don't know. I will tell you that when we found out that he had Corona, I tried to back check and think, so this was you were living with this guy, you know, you lived under the same roof, you drove home in the same car, and I didn't remember taking any precautions. But then I thought about it, and I thought, you know, Shalom Sudas, I know you, and I remembered harder, and I thought, you know what, we did do social distancing for each other for 5 days after the wedding, just because we knew that one or the other of us might. I mean, we did get the letter from the Rebbe, so we weren't panic-stricken or anything like that, but I think we did take some precautions. So it could be that just, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter. Precautions or no precautions, Hashem helped me, and I had the Rebbe's blessing. So anyway, any questions?
I'm glad you're both okay.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
Ditto, ditto.
Did he have a test? Is that how he found
Yeah,
out?
he had, there's an antibody test, and he asked, how accurate is this thing? And they told him, his doctor told him, this test is fairly foolproof. And he looked it up himself, and it's more than 99 point something percent certain that that there's a very limited number of false positives. So anyway,
Can you take the test too?
so I asked my doctor, and my doctor said no, they won't pay for it. It's $130. I could take it, I guess, but they won't pay for it if I didn't have symptoms. So that's what it is right now. Probably in New York they pay for it, because in New York they want everybody to be tested. So anyway.
There was some test and the number was very, very small, but to try to see how much herd immunity that Massachusetts actually
Yes.
has.
Yes.
But the truth is that there are plenty of people, like when, the whole thing about
Yes.
how accurate are these numbers and false positives and this and that. And as you said,
Yes.
people who were sick before the test and all the plenty of people who've been walking around asymptomatic, we really have no idea what the herd immunity is like these days. And there may be so many people who were carriers and didn't know it. And even with us all being home for 10 weeks, that it could have, they're finding that people had it in January, February, even December, that,
How do they know when they had it?
well, I think that people are not the asymptomatic folks, but like, for instance, one of my patients, his husband is a doctor at one of the major institutions, and he had, a fever and the chills and some aches and pains for a night, and it lasted for like 3 days. And then they told him that he should come in for a test, but that they should distance for 7 days. And they didn't have the partner be tested. But sure enough, they were distant for 7 days. But during those 7 days, 3 days later, the partner had it. My patient had it, where he had chills and whatever, whatnot, and and slight fever. And it was not that bad, but it happened. And then he was fine. And then after 7 days, the test came back and said he did one of his drive-through swaps, said that they never had it. But they know that they did. There's a 30% false negative.
Yeah.
And those tests, and it might have even been higher, but they don't want to scare people by saying we can't really tell. But if for folks who had it more mildly, it doesn't always come up.
Yeah.
Now,
Not a
my husband was saying 50% was false negative, especially maybe, back then that they could do it. So I think that, there's another two who weren't counted as corona, but both of them would probably show up on an antibodies test and would be counted now as herd immunity. So I think this whole thing about herd immunity of just giving antibodies tests to various places, they're saying we don't have enough of it based on their sample, but their sample was incredibly small, like really, really small. But the idea is that some of us have already passed through this a long time ago.
Yeah.
My friend at a seminary in New York, she said that there were 20 girls in the seminary, and one girl, she was sick for like a couple hours, and another girl was sick for 4 weeks. So it's really different for everyone.
Yes, like this guy in the story, he's in his probably late 40s, and he was in good condition, and he went from heaven to heck and back. And
Well, was the cold that he had part of the coronavirus, or did he have?
it started
cold?
it started out with, it seemed like a cold, then it was then it seemed like a virus, and then boing. And the whole thing, so and
is he recovered today?
Yeah, and he writes in here, he also writes, and he's in the magazine, and he said that this is sort of, it's sort of like it was the time he only was aware the first week and the fifth week, and the middle 3 weeks were gone for him. But the first week and the final week were among the most special times in his life. He said when he was alone in the hospital, before he was put into a comatose state, and there were no doctors in the room, no nurse, no family, it was just him and Hashem. And it was just an intimate, and he said, he said, I know what, like there were many people in Russia who were thrown into jail, into solitary confinement for teaching Judaism. And they also had the same experience. When it's you and Hashem and nothing else. It's just there's nothing like it. And he said he never wants to forget this time in his life. He said he hopes he doesn't get any reminders, but he never wants to forget it. He never wants to forget about it. And I have my first Rebbitzin, who I adore. When she was in her 40s, she had a brain tumor, and they had to fly her to California and give her surgery out there because I guess it was such a rare thing. I don't know what it was, what kind of thing it was that she needed to go all the way to California. And as she said afterwards, and she had a stroke in her 40s, and as a side effect of the surgery, and as she said, if you paid her millions of dollars, she would never, to go through it. She would never go through it for millions of dollars, what she had to go through. And she said, but if you paid her millions of dollars to take the experience away from her, she would not take millions of dollars. The experience was the most precious experience of her life. So Hashem is doing this to some people. I hope he doesn't do it to any of us. And God willing. But when he does something, he does it with purpose. It's not that person's never going to be the same person again. This Chaim Avigdor Zeitlin, he's never going to be the same person again. My Rebbetzin is never the same person again. And I know that the incredibly tough things in my life, I am a completely different person because of them. And, there's nothing that, sometimes, another time, but there was one, I think I told you the time, there was one time Hashem pounded me on the head like, one crisis after another. And I came out of those 3 crises a broken person. I was not myself. I was a broken person. But then I built myself again, and I was a completely different person afterwards. It was and I wouldn't give up that experience for anything. Hashem was doing, it was incomprehensible to me what Hashem was doing at the time. But then I see where he wanted me to go, and it's indeed very precious to me. So anyway, any more questions?
Well, Yechezkel Shimon started out by saying how we have to go through the darkness to find the light. Yeah. And so in all that's going on, and with the virus and everything else, but are we going through is the conclusion that we are going through the darkness, that this is a type of darkness that we're going through that is going to bring us into the light? And if so, how far into the future is it? Do you have any idea?
Absolutely not.
Can you shed any light?
Absolutely not. I don't have any idea. But we experience that it is darkness. And certainly it's totally an abnormal time in world history. And but we also know, how do we know that the light is happening? Because we know that the Rebbe is a prophet. We know that he's a proven prophet. He's way overqualified as a prophet. The Torah says in order to be a proven prophet, you have to be very holy, very righteous. You have to know the Torah backwards and forwards, and then you have to predict 2 things that are going to come true. The Rebbe's predicted. The Rebbe doesn't have, his batting average is 100% for wacky things, and thousands of things, hundreds and thousands of things. And the Rebbe told us in 1991 that we have entered, we are entering the era of the redemption, and that it's our generation, and that we will see the Geula. And that the Geula is actually now. It's not like it's going to happen in 10 years. This is actually the beginning of the Geula. And so we are, and also I want to tell you that what you're doing tonight by listening to this also hastens the complete revelation of the Geula, because the Rebbe said the fastest way to hasten the Geula, hasten the redemption, is by learning about it and by learning Hasidus. And that's exactly what you're doing in these little sessions. So Mazel Tov, you are speeding up the Geula. So you're actively doing good.
Salam Shehudas, these have all been great, but tonight was particularly moving and beautiful. Thank you.
My goodness. Okay, good. My goodness, thank you so much. And I'm going to go because, I turn into a pumpkin at 8 o'clock. I have to go do my schoolwork. And and I love you all.
We
And
like pumpkin pie, so that's okay.
okay, good. I made it for
Okay.
Shavuos. I couldn't send it to you. It has eggs in it. Okay. Be well,
Love-
my loves. Okay.
Stay well. Thank you
Thank
you,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you
We
so
love
much.
you too.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Have a good day at school tomorrow.
Thank you so much.